Lone Cowboy's Journey. Redemption, justice, and survival in the Wild West. Elias Turner rode slowly across the wide, open plains of Texas, the wind tugging at his worn coat and whipping dust into his face. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment the world seemed peaceful. But peace was something Elias rarely felt. Every mile he traveled, every town he passed, reminded him that he was running from something he could never truly escape. He had been a soldier once, a young man caught in the chaos of the Civil War. The war had ended, but its memory clung to him like a shadow. He remembered the screams, the smell of smoke and blood, and the face of his friend who had called out to him in vain. Fear had driven him to run, leaving his friend behind. That moment haunted Elias every day, and no matter how far he rode, he could not outrun it. When he returned home after the war, hoping for some peace, he found his family farm gone. Corrupt officials had taken everything while the country was still recovering from the war. The place where he had grown up, the fields he had worked with his father, the small house that held his happiest memories, it was all gone. With nothing left for him there, Elias had no choice but to leave. He mounted his horse and joined the long line of cowboys traveling from Texas to Kansas, working wherever he could, moving along the endless trails, never staying in one place for too long. Elias preferred the solitude of the open plains. There were no questions there, no expectations. The land was harsh and unforgiving, but it was honest. It demanded hard work, careful planning, and respect. The sky stretched wide and endless above him. The wind whispered secrets through the tall grass, and the horses carried him faithfully from one town to the next. But even among the quiet beauty of the prairie, his mind was restless, haunted by memories of his failures and mistakes. One afternoon, as he rode toward a small settlement near the New Mexico border, he saw signs of trouble. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the small town, but it was not the welcoming smoke of a peaceful place. It was the smoke of fear. Men were shouting, women were hurrying along the dirt streets with baskets clutched tightly in their arms, and the nervous clatter of hooves echoed from the sheriff's small jailhouse. Elias slowed his horse and observed from a distance. Something was wrong. A large man, dressed in fine clothes and riding a strong black horse, was moving down the street with a small group of rough-looking men. The man carried himself with an air of authority, but it was not respect he commanded, it was fear. This was Calvin Brody, the town's rancher and unofficial ruler. Stories of men like him were common in the West, those who thrived by taking from others, who used threats and violence to keep everyone else in line. Elias had seen men like Brody before, but something about this one made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Brody's men cornered a young homesteader, a man no older than 25. The man's hands were raised, his eyes wide with terror. He had refused to sell his land to Brody, and now he was paying the price. The men pushed him roughly, laughing when he stumbled. Elias felt a tight knot in his stomach. He had spent years avoiding fights, avoiding responsibility, but the sight of injustice lit something inside him that he had tried to bury. For a moment, Elias thought about riding past, keeping his head down as he always did. But then he remembered the friend he had abandoned on the battlefield. He remembered the feeling of helplessness and regret that had followed him home. He could not allow another person to suffer while he stood by. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of duty, not to himself, but to the man in front of him and the town that trembled under Brody's rule. Elias guided his horse into the street, the hooves clopping against the wooden planks of the boardwalk. The townspeople watched silently from their doorways, afraid to intervene. Even the sheriff, a thin, nervous man, stayed behind the bars of his office, hoping to avoid trouble. Elias dismounted and walked toward the young homesteader. "Step aside," he said calmly, his voice steady despite the tension. Brody turned, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the lone cowboy. "And who might you be?" he demanded. His hand rested on the grip of his revolver, though his confidence seemed more fragile than his words suggested. "Just a man who doesn't like to see injustice," Elias replied. He did not raise his voice, and he did not make threats. He simply stood there, tall and unshaken, with a quiet strength that came from years of surviving hardships. Brody laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "This is my town, my land, my rules." "I don't think," Elias said. "I know." The standoff lasted only a moment, but in that moment, something changed. The young homesteader straightened his back, finding courage in the presence of someone willing to stand for him. Brody's men shifted uneasily, sensing that the balance of power had shifted, even if just slightly. Elias helped the homesteader move to a safer part of town, away from the street where Brody's men could reach him. The townspeople, inspired by the courage of a single man, began to speak quietly among themselves. For the first time in years, they realized that fear could be challenged, that standing together mattered. After the young man was safe, Elias returned to his horse. He did not stay to celebrate or receive thanks. He had no desire for recognition. He simply knew that this act, small as it might seem, was the first step toward something greater, something that could heal the wounds of the past, if only a little. That night, Elias found shelter in a small barn at the edge of town, belonging to a widowed schoolteacher named Clara Whitmore. Clara was kind and practical, running her boarding school with quiet determination. She noticed Elias' fatigue and the haunted look in his eyes. "You've been through a lot," she said, offering him a warm meal and a soft blanket. "And I can see it still follows you." Elias nodded, surprised that anyone could see past his stoic exterior. Most people assumed he was just another wandering cowboy, a man who cared for nothing but the open plains. But Clara seemed different. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen, understood. "I've done things I'm not proud of," Elias admitted quietly. "Things I can't forget." Clara did not push for details. Instead, she simply sat with him, allowing silence to fill the space in a way that felt safe. For the first time in years, Elias felt a flicker of peace, a sense that maybe he could start to make amends for his past. The next morning, the town seemed unchanged at first glance. Dust swirled along the streets, the wind carried the smell of livestock and dry earth, and the sun rose bright and relentless. But Elias noticed subtle differences. People moved with a little more confidence, heads held slightly higher. They had witnessed courage, and it had left an impression. Elias prepared to leave, as he always did, but something held him back. He realized that he could not simply ride away from this place. Not yet. There were injustices to confront, people to protect, and perhaps a chance to find the redemption he had been seeking for so long. As he rode back into town, Elias felt the weight of his past beginning to shift, not gone, but lighter somehow. He did not know what the future held, or if he would succeed in standing against men like Brody. But for the first time, he felt that he had a purpose beyond survival. He had a chance to do what he had failed to do before, to face danger, to protect the weak, and to finally confront the man he had once been. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, golden in the morning sun. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it a promise that change was possible, even in the harsh, unforgiving Wild West. Elias Turner, the lone cowboy, rode forward with a new determination. He was still haunted by his past, but he was no longer running from it. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges he could not yet imagine. But for the first time, Elias believed that he could face them. Not just as a survivor, but as a man seeking justice, redemption, and perhaps a chance at a life worth living. And so, with the town behind him slowly waking to a new day, Elias rode into the horizon, ready to meet whatever trials the Wild West would throw his way. The story of a lone cowboy was only beginning, and this time it was a story of courage, hope, and the first steps toward redemption. Elias Turner stayed in the town longer than he had planned. At first, it was only a place to rest his horse and recover from the long ride. But as the days passed, he began to see the struggles of the townspeople more clearly. Life in the settlement was hard. Crops failed sometimes, animals were stolen, and people lived in constant fear of Calvin Brody and his men. The town had no real law, only the oppressive presence of Brody's ranch and his hired guns. Elias worked quietly, taking on small jobs around the town. He mended fences, helped with the cattle, and carried water for those who needed it. People were wary at first, keeping their distance. They had learned that outsiders rarely stayed, and often those who got involved ended up hurt. But Elias did not seem like the cowboys they had seen before. He worked without complaint, did not boast about his skills, and spoke little of himself. Clara Whitmore, the widowed schoolteacher who had offered him shelter, watched him carefully. She had lived in the town for many years and had seen many men come and go. She noticed the way Elias moved, the quiet strength in his hands, and the sadness that lingered in his eyes. One afternoon, while he was fixing a broken fence, she approached him carrying a basket of bread and fresh vegetables. "You work hard," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I can see that there's more on your mind than just fences and cattle." Elias paused, wiping sweat from his brow. He had learned long ago not to talk about his past. It only brought pain, and most people did not understand. But Clara was different. She had a way of listening that made people feel safe. "I've made mistakes," he said finally, his voice low. "Things I'm not proud of, things I wish I could take back." Clara nodded, offering a kind smile. "We all have mistakes, Mr. Turner. The question is, what will you do now? Will you let them define you, or will you do something to make things right?" Her words stayed with him long after she left. He realized that he had spent so many years running, from fear, from guilt, from pain, that he had forgotten what it felt like to stand for something. The town needed someone to act, and deep inside, he knew that he could no longer walk away. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, Elias heard shouting from the main street. Curious and concerned, he rode toward the sound. There in the fading light, he saw one of Brody's men dragging an elderly homesteader across the dirt road. The man was small and frail, and he struggled to resist. Brody wanted the man to sell his land, but he refused. The sight made Elias' stomach tighten. He could not stand by and watch. Without thinking, Elias guided his horse into the street. The sudden movement startled Brody's men, and they stopped, unsure how to respond. Elias dismounted quickly and stepped toward the homesteader. "Let him go," Elias said firmly. Brody's man laughed, cruel and sharp. "And who are you to tell us what to do?" "I'm someone who won't let you hurt people," Elias replied, his voice calm but strong. For a moment the men looked at him, measuring whether he was dangerous. Elias was not large, but there was a confidence in his stance, a steadiness in his eyes that spoke of experience and courage. The townspeople, hidden in doorways, watched silently, holding their breath. The fight was brief but decisive. Elias was faster and more precise than Brody's men expected. He knocked one man to the ground with a swift push and used the horsewhip he carried not to harm, but to disarm the others. By the time Brody arrived, Elias had the homesteader safely away from the street. The townspeople began to come out of their homes, some hiding behind fences, others leaning out of windows, all watching the confrontation unfold. They had seen what courage could look like, and for the first time they felt a spark of hope. Brody scowled as he approached Elias. His pride hurt more than his anger. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Elias did not respond with threats or anger. Instead, he simply helped the elderly man to his home, ensuring he was safe. Then he turned and rode back toward the barn where Clara waited, knowing that his actions would have consequences, but also knowing he could not have done otherwise. That night, Elias and Clara sat by the fire in the small barn. The warmth of the flames was comforting, but the tension in the air was thick. Clara handed him a cup of water and watched him quietly. "You did the right thing today," she said, "but this town will need more than one brave man if it is to survive Brody's control." "I know," Elias admitted. "I've spent so long running that I forgot what it felt like to face things, but seeing him hurt others, I couldn't turn away." Clara nodded. "The past may follow you, but it doesn't have to rule you. You have a choice now. You can let fear guide you, or you can let courage." Elias thought about her words long into the night. Memories of the battlefield, of his friend calling out in pain, of the farm that had been taken from him, they all came back, pressing on his mind. But for the first time, he felt a new determination. He would not run, not anymore. In the following days, Elias worked alongside the townspeople, helping them repair homes, mend fences, and protect their animals from theft. He also began teaching the young boys and girls of the town some of the skills he had learned as a soldier: how to ride, how to track, and how to protect themselves. The children were eager and curious, and they looked up to him in a way that warmed his heart. Despite his growing involvement, Elias remained cautious. He knew Brody would not give up his control easily. The rancher was clever and ruthless, using fear as his weapon. Elias spent time observing Brody's men, learning their habits and weaknesses, thinking carefully about how he could help the town without putting them in more danger. One afternoon, Elias noticed Brody's men harassing another young ranch hand. The man had refused to sell his land, and the enforcers were intent on punishing him. Elias felt the familiar knot of anger and responsibility tighten in his chest. He knew he could not let this happen again. He approached the young man quietly, offering him advice on how to stay safe while still standing his ground. He also left a warning for Brody's men, not with threats, but with a firm message. The people of this town were not as weak as they appeared. Word of Elias' actions spread quickly. The townspeople, once silent and fearful, began to whisper among themselves. They saw that someone was willing to act, to stand up to Brody, and it gave them courage. Even the sheriff, who had been timid and hesitant, began to show signs of support. The small town was beginning to stir, and Elias felt the first real sense of hope he had experienced in years. Clara noticed the change in him as well. She could see that Elias was slowly opening his heart again, letting go of some of the burden he had carried for so long. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the plains, she spoke softly. "You've helped more than you know, Elias. The town looks to you now not just as a man who acts, but as a symbol of what is possible. People can change, communities can grow stronger, and maybe so can you." Elias was quiet for a long time, thinking about her words. She was right. He had spent so long hiding from his past that he had forgotten he had the power to make a difference. He had the power to protect, to teach, and to inspire. For the first time, he felt that he could begin to make amends for the mistakes he had made in his life. But he also knew that this was only the beginning. Brody would not give up easily, and the path ahead would be dangerous. Elias would have to rely on his skills, his wits, and his courage to protect the town and the people who had come to trust him. And so, as the night settled over the town, Elias Turner prepared himself for the challenges to come. He had found a purpose, a reason to stand, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that he was exactly where he needed to be. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, not as a man running from his past, but as a man determined to protect the future. The town felt different in the early morning light. The air was crisp, and the horizon seemed endless, stretching out as far as the eye could see. Yet beneath the calm there was tension, an almost invisible current of fear that had not left the streets entirely. Elias Turner rode slowly through the town, his horse's hooves clopping against the wooden boardwalks, each sound echoing in the quiet dawn. He had been watching and waiting for this moment, knowing that a confrontation with Calvin Brody was inevitable. Brody had grown more aggressive in the last few days. He sent his men to harass anyone who dared resist him. Farmers were being pressured to sell their land at unfair prices. Merchants had been threatened with violence if they did not comply with his demands. Even the children of the town had learned to look over their shoulders. Elias could feel the fear pressing down on the town like a heavy cloud. And yet, he also sensed a change. People were watching, waiting, hoping that someone would finally stand up. Elias dismounted near the center of town and walked slowly along the main street. The shops and homes were quiet, shutters closed, and the townspeople peered out cautiously from windows and doorways. He could feel their eyes on him. They were not looking for trouble, they were looking for courage. For the first time, Elias understood that he was no longer acting just for himself. He had become the symbol of resistance, whether he wanted it or not. As he walked, he saw Brody's men forcing a young ranch hand to the ground. The boy had refused to sell his small piece of land, and the men were using force to make him comply. Elias' stomach tightened, and his hands clenched into fists. He had tried to avoid this type of violence before, relying on skill and strategy, but now he knew there was no turning back. He would not allow anyone else to suffer while he stayed on the sidelines. He approached the scene, and Brody's men immediately noticed him. "Well, look who's here," one of them sneered. "The wandering cowboy thinks he can stop us." Elias' eyes were calm, steady, and focused. "Step away," he said simply. "Leave him be." The men laughed, a cruel, grating sound. "Or what?" one asked. Elias did not answer with words. He moved with quiet precision, disarming the nearest man with a swift strike and forcing the others back with the tip of his horsewhip. The ranch hand scrambled to his feet and ran to safety, while the men stumbled in confusion. Elias' calm confidence made them hesitate, and hesitation was dangerous in a fight. By the time Brody himself arrived, Elias was standing alone in the center of the street, his hat low, his eyes sharp. Brody's black horse snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the tension in the air. "You've caused enough trouble," Brody said, his voice low and dangerous. "This ends today." Elias did not flinch. "It ends when you stop hurting people," he said. The two men stared at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. This was not just a fight over property or pride, it was a fight for the heart of the town. The people gathered quietly, standing behind fences, leaning out of windows, all waiting for what would happen next. They knew that fear had been broken once before, but now it was time for something more. Brody drew his revolver first. Elias, steady and calm, did the same. The two men circled each other, the dry dirt of the street kicking up in small clouds around their boots. Time seemed to slow. The wind whispered through the wooden buildings, carrying the tension like a drumbeat. Elias remembered his past, the battlefield, the screams, the friend he had abandoned. The guilt and fear that had chased him for years rose up like a wave, threatening to overwhelm him. But this time he would not turn away. This time he would face the moment with courage. The duel began. Gunfire cracked sharply in the morning air, echoing off the buildings. Dust swirled around their feet and the townspeople held their breath. Brody was fast, aiming with precision, but Elias had learned patience and control. He waited, watched, and then acted with skill born of years surviving the harshest conditions. The first shot missed, kicking up a cloud of dust behind Brody. The second shot grazed the wooden post near Elias, but he was ready. With a steady hand and careful aim, he fired. Brody staggered, his face twisting in shock as he realized he had been defeated. He fell to the ground, the street silent for a brief, almost sacred moment. The townspeople erupted quietly, a mix of relief and awe. Fear had ruled them for years, but in the face of courage it crumbled. They stepped forward cautiously, understanding that they were no longer powerless. The town had a chance to rebuild, to reclaim what was rightfully theirs, but the danger was not over. One of Brody's men, hiding on a rooftop, fired a shot in retaliation. The bullet struck Elias in the side and he stumbled, gripping his wound. Pain flared sharply, but he did not cry out. The townspeople rushed to help, capturing the remaining men while Elias steadied himself against a fence. Clara was at his side within moments, worry etched on her face. "You're hurt," she said, pressing a cloth against his side. "We have to get you inside." "I'll be fine," Elias said through gritted teeth. "Just help me stand." The townspeople worked together, carrying Brody's captured men to the small jailhouse and tending to the wounded. For the first time, they saw what could happen when they acted together, when fear was replaced by courage. The town was changing, and Elias had been the spark. As he rested that evening, bandaged and supported by Clara, Elias reflected on what had happened. He had faced danger and fear, not for himself, but for others. He had confronted the man who had caused so much suffering and had survived. For the first time, he felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond survival. He had stood for something, and he had not turned away. Clara sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You did what many would not dare," she said softly. "You faced your fears and you protected the people who needed you. That is something to be proud of." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had carried guilt and shame for so long, and now, for the first time, he felt that he had begun to make amends. He had faced danger, protected the innocent, and confronted the darkness of the town without fear. In the days that followed, Elias helped the town rebuild. Homes were repaired, fences were mended, and people began to speak freely again. They were no longer silent in fear. Farmers reclaimed their land, merchants reopened their shops, and children played in the streets without worry. The town was alive with hope, and Elias was at the center of it all, not as a hero seeking recognition, but as a man who had done what was right. Even though he had been wounded, Elias continued to work alongside the townspeople. He trained the men in defense, showed them how to protect their property, and encouraged them to stand together. He taught the children not just how to ride and handle tools, but also the importance of courage, honesty, and resilience. Brody's influence was gone, but Elias knew that danger could return at any time. He remained vigilant, watching the horizon and the trails leading into town. His past had taught him that life was unpredictable and often cruel, but he had also learned that courage and preparation could make a difference. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elias sat with Clara on the porch of her small schoolhouse. They watched the town below, children laughing as they played, merchants tending their shops and farmers working the fields. For the first time, Elias felt a deep sense of peace. "You've changed this town," Clara said quietly, "and maybe you've changed yourself too." Elias smiled faintly. "I hope so," he replied. "I've spent so long running from my past." Now I think I'm finally ready to face the future. Clara reached out and placed her hand on his. The future belongs to those who have courage, and you have plenty of that. Elias felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not known in years. He had found purpose, not in running or hiding, but in standing up for what was right. The town had been saved, and in doing so, he had begun to save himself. As night fell and stars appeared in the wide, dark sky, Elias knew that his journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments that would test his courage and resolve. But for the first time, he was not afraid. He had faced the darkness, confronted fear, and stood for justice. And now he knew that he could face whatever came next, with strength, skill, and an unwavering heart. The plains stretched endlessly beyond the town, quiet and mysterious in the moonlight. Elias Turner, the lone cowboy, had faced one of the greatest challenges of his life, and had emerged not just victorious, but transformed. He had discovered that true courage was not about fighting alone, but about standing with others, protecting the innocent, and doing what was right even when it was difficult. And as he looked out over the quiet town, Elias realized that this was only the beginning. The Wild West was full of dangers, hardships, and trials, but he was ready. He had found redemption in his actions, justice in his courage, and survival in his determination. The story of the lone cowboy was far from over. It was only growing stronger. The morning sunlight stretched across the plains, painting the town in soft gold. The air smelled of fresh earth, hay, and the faint scent of smoke from the chimneys of the small homes. Birds sang quietly, and for the first time in years the town felt alive, not because of its buildings or streets, but because of the people who lived there. Elias Turner sat on the porch of Clara Whitmore's schoolhouse, his horse grazing nearby. His wound from the confrontation with Calvin Brody had healed, though he still felt a dull ache in his side. Every step he took reminded him of the fight, but the pain was not discouraging. It was a reminder that he had faced something impossible and had survived. He had grown stronger, not just in body but in spirit. The town had changed in the weeks since Brody's fall. Fear no longer controlled the people. Farmers tilled their fields with pride, knowing that their land belonged to them. Merchants reopened their shops, speaking freely to neighbors and customers. Children ran through the streets, laughing and shouting, unafraid of the dark shadow that had once hung over their homes. Even the sheriff, a timid man before, now walked with confidence, enforcing the law fairly and without intimidation. Elias watched all of this quietly, realizing that he had played a part in it. He had been the spark that reminded the town of their courage, but the people themselves had taken the steps to reclaim their lives. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the work he had done was not for recognition or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Clara came out of the schoolhouse carrying a basket of fresh bread and vegetables. She placed it on the porch beside Elias and sat down next to him. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined," she said softly. "You've given this town hope." Elias nodded, his eyes following the children playing in the streets. "I just did what I had to do," he replied. "I couldn't turn away this time," Clara smiled. "Sometimes that's enough, sometimes it's everything." Elias thought about his past, the years of running, the mistakes he had made, and the guilt he had carried. For so long, he had believed that he could never make amends for what he had done. But now, looking at the town and the people he had helped protect, he realized that redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about choosing to act with courage in the present. It was about standing for something bigger than yourself, even when it is difficult. The day passed quietly, filled with small moments of peace. Elias helped repair a fence for one of the farmers, shared stories with the children about riding and tracking, and offered guidance to anyone who needed it. He was no longer just a lone cowboy. He was part of the community, respected and valued. And yet he felt a restlessness he had not experienced before. He knew that his journey was not over. The West was vast and full of challenges. There were other towns where injustice ruled, other people who needed help, and other threats that could not be ignored. Elias had discovered that he could face these challenges, and he understood that he could not stay in one place forever. That evening, he rode out to the edge of town, where the plains stretched endlessly into the horizon. The sky was painted with deep oranges and purples as the sun sank behind the hills. He stopped for a moment, letting the wind whip through his hair and dust the horse's mane. The open land was quiet, almost sacred, and he felt a connection to it that went beyond simple survival. Clara joined him, walking beside the horse. "Where are you going?" she asked gently. Elias looked out at the horizon, his eyes thoughtful. "I don't know," he admitted. "There are other places, other people who need help, but I also know that I can't stay in one place. I've learned too much to ignore it." Clara nodded, understanding. "Then go," she said. "But remember what you've learned here. Courage isn't just about fighting. It's about standing for what is right, protecting the innocent, and facing your fears. Take that with you wherever you go." Elias smiled faintly. "I will." He mounted his horse, feeling the familiar rhythm beneath him. The town had become a place of safety and hope, and he knew that it would continue to thrive even after he left. But the open plains called to him, as they always had, reminding him that life was about movement, challenges, and new beginnings. As he rode slowly through the streets, the townspeople came out to watch. Some nodded in respect, others waved quietly. Children ran alongside him for a short distance, laughing and pretending to ride their own imaginary horses. Elias waved back, feeling a warmth in his heart that he had not known in years. When he reached the edge of town, he turned once to look back. Clara stood on the porch, a small smile on her face, and the town behind her seemed alive with possibility. Elias felt a deep sense of gratitude. This town had given him something he had thought he would never find again: peace, purpose, and the knowledge that he had made a difference. Then he turned forward, guiding his horse onto the open plains. The wind rushed past him, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant mountains. The horizon seemed endless, full of promise and challenge. Elias did not know what awaited him, but he felt ready. He had faced fear, confronted injustice, and discovered the strength within himself to act when it mattered most. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be hardships, dangers, and moments that tested his resolve. But Elias Turner, the lone cowboy, was no longer the man who had run from his past. He was a man who had faced it, learned from it, and used it to guide his actions. He rode forward with confidence, knowing that he could meet whatever came his way. As night fell, stars began to appear in the sky, shining like small beacons of hope. The plains stretched out endlessly, quiet and mysterious. Elias rode on, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders, but also the freedom that came with choice. He had chosen courage, justice, and compassion. He had chosen to stand, and for the first time in his life he felt truly free. The wind carried his thoughts far into the distance, over hills, rivers, and valleys. He thought of the people he had helped, the lives he had touched, and the lessons he had learned. Each step forward was a step into a future he could shape. The past would always be with him, but it would no longer control him. Elias knew that the Wild West was full of stories like his, stories of hardship, bravery, and hope. He understood that his journey was just one of many, and that the world was bigger than any single town, any single problem. But he also knew that one person could make a difference. One person could inspire others, challenge injustice, and bring light to places shadowed by fear. As the night deepened, Elias rode under the stars, the vast plains opened before him. He had found redemption not in comfort but in action. He had found justice not in revenge but in protecting the innocent. He had found survival not just in skill but in courage and determination. The journey would continue as it always had. But Elias Turner, the lone cowboy, was ready. He had faced the Wild West, faced himself, and discovered the strength to move forward with hope. He was no longer running. He was riding toward a future he could create, a future guided by courage, justice, and the freedom of the open land. And as he rode into the distance, the town fading behind him, he felt a sense of peace unlike any he had known. The plains stretched endlessly, full of challenges and opportunities. The sun would rise again, the wind would continue to blow, and Elias Turner would continue to ride. Alone, but never lonely, because he carried with him the lessons, courage, and hope that had shaped him into the man he had become. The story of the lone cowboy, once a tale of guilt and running, had transformed into a story of redemption, justice, and survival. Elias Turner's journey was far from over, but he had learned that the greatest battles were not always fought with guns or fists, but with courage, heart, and the willingness to stand for what was right. And so, under the endless sky of the Wild West, Elias rode onward, ready to face whatever lay ahead, his heart steady, his purpose clear, and his spirit free.